Welcome everyone to Myth Informed with your hosts, Brian and Dimitri. Today we have with us Lyndsey Ogle. She is an interdisciplinary artist and curator exploring the intersections of cultural discourse, narrative, and technology through performance, public engagement, and online content. Those were a lot of words. She's basically a very cool, smart artist lady working on her PhD at Berkeley, currently researching art through rural America. Lyndsey, so happy to have you here. Welcome.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
So, Lyndsey, you were involved in the famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, in Berkeley in September of 2017. So my question is, did you and Ben Shapiro party like it was 1999?
We did not. I was on campus the day that Ben Shapiro came. I did not go hear him speak. It was really crazy. It was very much, the campus looked like a war zone. It was pretty scary, to be perfectly honest.
Concrete barriers and these police vehicles that look like mini tanks.
Yeah, it was. I think one of the things that people don't understand when they talk about, these students sort of having a fit about things was just how very disruptive it was, and just how many police were on campus, and the fact that you had people in full SWAT gear standing on rooftops as you're trying to make your way through. And we get these sort of police alerts throughout the day, and people were getting alerts I want to say at 8 o'clock in the morning, after people have already headed to campus, saying that, backpacks weren't going to be allowed on campus, U-locks for bikes weren't going to be allowed on campus, all of these things. And it was, it was pretty crazy. I think that what's interesting about that is Ben Shapiro has come to speak at Berkeley a couple of times before, and there wasn't as much of an issue. And I don't particularly like Ben Shapiro or agree with his politics, but I really don't think that he was sort of the center of so much of the turmoil, as it was just part of a larger kind of constellation of events that were happening at once, and sort of months and months of angst kind of leading up to it.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is you guys had a free speech week that you were doing right before, literally it ended the moment that, the day before he was about to speak. So was that, obviously that was planned ahead of time and you knew that he was coming. How did those two events kind of coincide with each other?
Well, so actually there were a half dozen events. There were so many events. So Chancellor Christ started at the end of last year. And so sort of following the events of the Milo Yiannopoulos sort of dramatic non-event last February, there was talk about creating sort of a free speech year. That was Chancellor Christ's sort of big idea. And so the Chancellor's office had started planning things as early as, I think, last May. I was involved with a student organization, the Graduate Assembly. I'm the editor of the Berkeley Graduate, and we partnered with Bridge USA, which is a bipartisan student group on campus, an undergrad group, and the Berkeley Center for New Media to put on Reply All, which was the name of our conference, which happened to be the Thursday after Speech Week, or Free Speech Week, I believe. And so then all of these things were sort of being planned independently. Over the summer, the chancellor was sending out calls asking students to be involved in her various events. And then sort of unbeknownst to us, we kind of knew that the Berkeley College Republicans were planning this Free Speech Week. We can talk about whether or not that was really an event that was going to be planned later, or whether that was just a publicity stunt. We have different opinions on that, depending on who you talk to. So there was a constellation of events that were happening, and it just kind of became all-encompassing. It was sort of anything anybody could talk about, disrupting classes, completely changing the political dynamics of departments, and just physically altering the campus.
Can you take us back in the timeline? Because you mentioned that there was stuff that happened around the Milo thing. And that, if I understand, that was in September of 2017. But you were saying there was
it's earlier than that.
February.
Yes,
okay, so it was
Ben Shapiro was in September.
That's right, because he was supposed to come back. Okay, so Milo was supposed to be there Feb 2017. Are you saying there was maybe fallout at Berkeley for preventing him from speaking that had the president of the university going, all right, we have to fix this shit, and so he convened this year of free speech? Is that kind of what happened?
Well, it's she, but
sorry.
here, Chris. Yeah, so so the Milo event that happened in February of 2017, he came to speak. He was brought by the college Republicans, and I don't think Bridge was a part of that event, but they had planned this event, and it was right on the heels of Milo coming to another campus where there was physical violence that had broken out, and another event where he had outed a trans student during his speech.
That was here in Milwaukee.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it was. And so it was following that, and there was just a lot of concern about, there was talk that he was going to PRA our emails. And because we're a public institution, he could get access to things. They were talking about trying to release the names of undocumented students and showing their faces on the screen. So there was a lot of whether or not these things were actually going to happen. This was sort of the hearsay that was going around. This was what was sort of trickling down to people.
Where was that hearsay specifically coming from? Was
on
student
campus?
body, or was that just you're at a Panera and someone's talking about Milo coming and this stuff happening?
No, I mean, I think you were hearing that. You were hearing that from students. You were hearing administrators who were hearing it through the grapevine, student organizers. So I've been involved with the Graduate Assembly of Berkeley for 5 years. And so we're very tuned in to what's going on at sort of the highest levels in the university. So there was a lot of talk of what was going to happen based on what he had done at other events. And so in addition to sort of our campus being concerned and bringing the police on, although I guess they didn't really have that many police at that event, but the sort of, you had the, sorry?
The Berkeley mayor had actually told the police to stand down.
Yeah.
This is
the February event. This is when Antifa, the Black Bloc came. And it was scary. So, I mean, the only way to shut down an event is for there to be physical violence or the risk thereof, right? So that was essentially their strategy, was come to campus. And these are a lot of people who weren't from the Berkeley community, who were from, sort of various parts of the city, who show up, who wear masks, who sort of, the idea is we're going to destroy public property, and then the police will get called, and then the event will be shut down. So that's basically what happened. And so then after that, because people were injured, because people went to the hospital, and not just, I mean, people on both sides. I know people who were there who were protesters who were injured, and people who were there who were sort of conservative supporters of the event who were injured, and people went to the hospital and who were arrested. It was just a mess.
There's media gets around. So there's a woman there's a young woman who's a Trump supporter that I think she has her MAGA hat on, and she's walking in and she's minding her own business. She gets maced out of the middle of nowhere. So that kind of a video goes viral, and then you've got a whole bunch of people on the right that are like, oh my God, what's wrong with Berkeley? They're completely insane.
Well, they're spinning their own narrative.
What happens, right?
The interesting thing, Lyndsey, for someone who was there, did you happen to talk to, let's call it people who were protesting Milo being there? Were any of them disavowing the Antifa actions, or was there talk about, well, this is totally un-Berkeley-like behavior, and we don't stand for this?
There is a couple of perspectives on that. I will say about the sort of the media representation. What's interesting when you see those photos is it seems like it's this huge uproar, right? Like it's blocks wide, and it's not. It was a very sort of small contained area of Sproul that was where everything was happening. And that's sort of been part of the media narrative of all of this. It's always so interesting to me how things appear so much larger than they really are, or they focus on one thing, like one negative interaction when there's all of this other stuff going on. That being said, it was interesting because there were people who I think had, a valid point that the university was very, very upset about the physical damage to the infrastructure, the buildings that were damaged, But there wasn't a lot of concern in their minds about the damage that was being done or the potential damage that was being done to the student body. And, you know, when people first started making those claims, there was a lot of debate about that. Like, well, it's words. How much are they, how much are words really injurious? As a humanities scholar, we believe they are. This is something we study at length.
Where you said there was debate. Sorry,
yeah, go for it.
Where exactly was that in classes? Did you have student groups that were debating this? I'm trying to figure out how
the group or reply all.
Well, how official is this, or is this just kind of hearsay that's happening on the streets between students?
Yeah. So you have to understand, it was part of the dialogue. It was what you talked about when you were having coffee with a colleague. It was what was being talked about in classrooms. It was what was being talked about at department meetings, and it was being talked about in official forums. So
March 2017, this is a big deal for everyone who's there on campus at the moment.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like, there was a lot happened in February. There was a lot of sort of immediate action and immediate response and frustration, but I don't think that things really picked up until the fall. That's when, because over the summer, sort of everybody went their own way. People were still organizing and talking about these things. But then you came back and you were inundated with media. We're inundated with the sounds of helicopters overhead 24/7, which, you know, it's interesting, as Americans, we're really privileged not to live in a militarized zone and not to understand just how deafening that can be to listen to that day in and day out. And so this went on for months, and I think people were just raw.
What are we talking here? Because we know Charlottesville happened in August.
February, that's when it really picks up, though. And that's what we want to ask you is, like, ever since like Milo's thing blows up, remember, there's things on fire that the media makes it look a lot bigger than it is, which is also true.
But how long ago does it happen?
February 17.
Correct. You disperse the crowds.
Talks about this until
they talk about it. But Lyndsey, you're saying helicopters. Are helicopters flying Feb to August?
No, I'm talking about in the fall. So we have the Milo event in February. There is an immediate response. We have a change of leadership within the university. It's transition. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. Chancellor Chris starts holding meetings with various student leaders to get a feeling of what they want the university to look like and how things want to move forward. There's a lot of emails that are sent. Some feel genuine. Others feel very bureaucratic, I guess.
It comes out hard for free speech, though. What did you think about the change in leadership? And did you think it had anything to do with, like, the Milo event?
No, I think it totally had to do with the Milo event. I mean, I think she, and not just the Milo event. You have to understand, the university is being sued for sexual harassment cases. We had faculty at the dean who had to the law school who had to step down. We've had all of these sort of one major hurdle after another over the last several years. And so when Chancellor Dirk stepped down and Chancellor Chris came in, I think a lot of people I think there was a portion of people who were hopeful that she would have a different tact. And there were a lot of people who felt like she's kind of in a no-win situation, because to step into a role that probably nobody really wanted, like nobody really wanted to take over the university at this moment when we're having massive budget cuts and just political upheaval. It's not exactly a great time to start.
And for as much as like has been said bad about Berkeley, like they did come out pretty hard for free speech, and so much that they said, whatever it's going to cost to keep the campus safe when Ben Shapiro comes, we're going to pay it. And that number turned out to be, I think, $650,000. And they paid it. And so that's pretty awesome. That when you're going to do that, if you're a free speech fan, like, regardless of what you have to say about Berkeley and their politics, that's a very pro free speech stance.
I think the dollar really pushes politics as well. If you know that you have to pay that much against, let's call it left-wing radicals for the purpose of the discussion, at some point, you know, you pay $650, you're going to be like, Fuck those people. They keep, they keep destroying public property. We're not going to stand by this.
But it can be a form of censorship, right? I mean, budgetary censorship in that way. Like if it's going to cost you that much money, well, maybe you can't do it. Like,
well, and you have to also understand that part of the issue, part of the issue that was happening was, did I lose you all?
No, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I keep losing you. So before this happened, there wasn't a clear events policy in place. I mean, a lot of this could have been avoided had the university had something that was clear cut. And now they're working on it. They started working on it in the fall when all of this happened. It's still, they are still in the process. They've been having regular hearings. You can see the hearings online, sort of open forums for both students, faculty, and then also Berkeley community members to come and speak about the changes to the policy. But a lot of the things that people don't understand too is that the groups who were putting on these events weren't really completing sort of their part of the process in order to make these things happen.
Is that why? Because one of the things, I listen to all the media, right? Like I feel like a masochist or a sadist to turn on MSNBC and then watch Fox News. But when you listen to the talking, if you were watching Fox News, you heard this. Well, the college Republicans, which is a student group at Berkeley, right? A small one, and they're probably like libertarians and not Republicans. But anyways, they invite Ben Shapiro, but Berkeley said, well, you're going to have to pay an extra $15,000 for security, which, for a student group is enormously expensive. But you didn't have to see that, right? With the Democrats invited X person. So that's a form of censorship. So they crowdfunded it or, paid the $15,000 in a day, but then even more was needed. So am I getting this correctly? And is it because they didn't check some of the dots and I's, the T's and I's? Is that why this happened? Or can you give us the real story of that?
So I'm not exactly sure. I know that with the Ben Shapiro event, it was their community partner is the one who paid the extra money. I can't remember the name of that organization, a Republican organization for college leadership, I believe. And they were able to fund it. And that is actually not unheard of for when a person brings a large, sort of a well-known speaker to campus. I think at one point the Dalai Lama came or something like that. And they had to raise this money because you have to have the security. Security is required at all student events, especially, and it gets more complicated when there's alcohol and things like that involved. But you have to sort of go through all of these processes in order to be able to do something on campus. So for that, I think they did it in Poly Ballroom, which is the main large space on campus. And I think for that event, I believe they went about everything the way that they should. I don't think that the university was prepared for just the response that we got. And I also, again, because Ben Shapiro has spoken at the university multiple times before, I really feel like so much of it was being caught up in the media storm that was sort of this idea of Free Speech Week, which was the Steve Bannon, Milo, Ann Coulter pretend event that didn't happen.
Right.
That didn't come. And it was on the heels of Charlottesville. So you had a charged climate.
Exactly.
That all makes sense because I don't know if it's fair to say this, but would it be fair to say that your typical college activist who only sees blue and red saw red and couldn't differentiate between a Ben Shapiro who is a
centrist, right?
Well, he completely denounces someone like a Milo. He refuses to talk to him, and a Milo or an Ann Coulter. So they're while they may lean the same way politically because we have a two-party system, they're totally opposite people. So people didn't see that; they just saw a Republican and they kind of saw red. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. And again, like you said, it was on the heels of Charlottesville. Things were pretty tense.
Now, do you think it's Charlottesville specifically? Maybe in Berkeley it's different because there's the Battle of Berkeley where the alt-right battles Antifa. And this is back, I think, in 2016. And nobody's paying attention to this. Like, it's weird that a lot of these battles between kind of, I think, the radical right and the radical left are being fought out west, not in the east. No one takes attention until Trump is running, and then Charlottesville, everybody's defriending each other. Like, this is when it seems like politics goes in a logarithmic up, and then you guys are what, wonderfully 3 months after this.
Yeah, we're in a moment right now, I do believe, where it's starting to get to be that you can't talk politics with people that you want to continue to have a relationship with. If are we having a buzz? If that's, you know,
you're there. You mentioned there after your event, you had a series of tweets, and one of them said the internet brought us inside our friends and relatives' opinions, and this is a disappointment.
Yeah.
It was a really good point, because like, you didn't seem to know before social media what your friends that you like to hang out with's political opinions were. I mean, you just knew them, and now you're like, oh wow, they're hardcore Republican. Oh my God, they're like a social justice warrior.
And why does that have to impact anything?
Right? Why does that have to influence whether or not we watch the football game or I don't know, go to the same movies?
I mean, I think the events around Free Speech Week really explain why, because you're talking about, in a lot of cases, people whose views are that, whether it be the case of trans students or undocumented students or the Black student community, that there are people who don't believe that those people have equal rights or deserve to be there or should, you know, be allowed to, you know, feel safe in the classroom. And so then it becomes an issue of, well, your personal feelings about everyone that I consider sort of my people kind of eliminate our ability to maintain a relationship. I think that's kind of what we saw happening. Suddenly there was a lot of lines in the sand being drawn.
Is there a lot of...
Or not suddenly, I think this was always there. I just think it's more visible now.
No, I get it, because I think like where we are in the business of organizing debates and conversations, and what is sometimes said to us by those, and this is me trying to kind of understand kind of the activists from the left, is saying, well, we're not interested in debating our humanity. And I say, well, nobody's humanity is on debate. But like, seriously though, if a person would say, we need as a country to regulate our borders, that could be considered problematic. Just that statement, that it will come off racist and that somebody is dehumanized by that. To me, I don't get it. Because I'm not making a statement about race. You're making a statement about nationalism, and borders ought to be controlled. It just, where am I missing the boat here? Because it seems like everything is being strawmanned into debate about my humanity when we're in fact talking about this. Like if I say, what are we going to eat? And then I say, oh, you think I should starve to death? That's what I hear. Like, break it down for me.
Well, I think at a base level, you have to think about language. Again, words are powerful. And I think, you know, it's one thing to say we need to think about how we regulate our borders. I don't think that anybody's going to necessarily charge you with being a racist for saying that. Now, if you say we need
everyday feminism,
we need to go after, if you say we need to go after illegal immigrants or illegals, that's when you start to, the language is powerful, right? You're calling a person illegal, you're taking away their humanity in a way. And I think that's where it gets tricky. And it's difficult to have these conversations, again, because not everybody has the same vocabulary. Not everybody has the same sort of knowledge base, especially in the Midwest, and especially in parts of the country where you tend to be grouped with other like-minded individuals. And as a country, we're becoming more and more segregated in that way. So it's really sort of, the onus is on us to think broadly, to try to expand the sort of the depth of what we look at and the types of media that we look at. And, you know, maybe read the news beyond just Facebook.
We notice, at least I won't speak for you, Brian. I think that the line in the sand keeps drawing keeps being drawn farther and farther. So you talked about language. Totally agree with you. If you talk about illegals, even that I think shouldn't be a gray area. You should be able to talk about it and not offend people. But then it gets drawn farther out into all of these issues are intermingled. And now you can't talk. I know a bunch of people who are fiscal conservative social liberals. This is a totally underrepresented group in this country. Constantly we talk about that. Don't care about gay rights, equality, cool, everything is fine, but I don't want government regulation, for example. There's a ton of people who are that voting bloc, and they get lumped into the racist
right
pool.
wing, alt-right, they're called.
Correct. And so now, if you don't believe in this is again my perception, if you don't believe in one liberal tenet, you don't believe in all of them, you're a Nazi. It's that hyperbolic rhetoric has just fallen off a cliff.
Right. It reminds me of religion in that way, that if you don't believe that Jesus Christ was our savior and do all of these propitiations, and if you miss a single holy day of obligation, you're not a Christian, you're not a Catholic, you're a sinner, you're a heretic.
Wow.
Like, is there not a purity spiral that you see going on?
And have you not noticed that type of dichotomy?
Oh, I very much noticed that type of dichotomy. I think that was one of the things that was the most difficult for me in being involved with this. I was told that I was complicit with the alt-right for partnering with a bipartisan organization on campus that some felt was not bipartisan. They felt was actually... Some felt that they were obviously the alt-right because at one point they had attempted to bring Ann Coulter to campus and then later rethought that decision and apologized for it, which is a whole different conversation to be had. But no, I think that is very much the case. I think I was having a conversation with a faculty member recently, and we were talking about sort of these axes, right, that are being drawn. And you have sort of free speech, you're one or the other, right? You're on one side or the other. You believe in all free speech, or, you believe that certain things are hate speech and one way. And sort of her comment was there's so many other axes. There's so many other lines of complication and discourse that we have to think about when we think about these things. And because everything is interwoven, you can't just look at one topic or another. You kind of had to see how everything is put together.
Have you noticed that actually happening? I mean, and I want to come back to talk about the Ben thing, because you had this whole free speech week where you had a lot to talk about. But jumping forward to now, has there been any progress? Have people started disassociating some viewpoints from another? Has there been a public, denouncement of, say, Antifa practices? Has any of this kind of resonated?
I think with some critical distance, I think there are people who felt left out of those conversations before. And I will say, I think I felt like that. I felt like there was not necessarily room for a voice that believes in free speech, believes that someone like Ben should be allowed to speak, but doesn't necessarily agree with Milo being able to come, right, and sort of the politics involved in those things. Who I think have since found each other. And I think also there was just a lot of people who just wanted to get back to life, who were trying to take a chem final or, that kind of thing, who then felt like they were being judged for wanting to focus on their work too, which is a whole sort of separate issue. But I think it's not just the left. I think, unfortunately, for many of us, it seems like the Republican Party has been just absorbed by the alt-right, and that it's really hard when you meet somebody who self-identifies as a Republican these days, given the fact that you have not you, but we all unfortunately have a president who, tweets at 3 a.m., all of, the craziest things. It's sort of hard to say, where is that line? Where is the separation between, as you might say, a liberal or liberal moderate from, say, Antifa? And I think that something has to happen on both sides in order for that to happen.
It's language, though. Like when you say alt-right, right? If you look at and I'm going to quote Richard Spencer here, who this is
God.
of the alt-right. Like the alt-right believes that we need to be a majority white an ethno-white nation. And that if we're right, the United States, that if we lose a majority white status, that civilization itself like needs to be stewarded by white people. Like this is inherently racist, right? To then equate the Republican with alt-right. I mean, the alt-right are a small fringe. They went nuts at Charlottesville, and again, the media did the same thing that they did with Berkeley, with the left-wing radicals, with the right-wing radicals. If you take some of the other pictures that don't make it in the media, that event looks pathetic. Like everything has been done to make that look bigger than it is. And they were from all over the world. If the alt-right was so big, they wouldn't need to recruit people outside of Virginia. Instead, they're all over the country. They got like 200 diehards together. That's it. I mean, to say Republican and alt-right, though, I think right away, anyone libertarian leaning is instantly turned off, because that would be like me saying, oh, you're a Democrat, then you're probably Antifa. Like,
yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think the problem is that we have had sort of one issue after another that has kind of reinforced the sort of feelings on the left that perhaps people who claim to be centrist actually aren't. And like, as you say, like the alt-right is this sort of white nationalist perspective, right? But then, you know, whether it's gun violence or whether it's immigration or whether it's women's rights, it seems like sort of time and time and time again, as these issues come up, it's defaulting to sort of a defensive position of the white male power structure. And again, this is a much larger conversation than what is to be had in this space. But I think my point is that on both sides, we are in a moment of extremism, and the extremists have control of the White House. And so it's really hard for people who are only getting their information from Fox News or only getting their information from MSNBC to then see anybody else is in the middle, you know?
I think a narcissist has control of the White House, right? I think that Trump is loyal to himself and not a whole lot of other interest groups. I guess if you look at it, though, from the other perspective, they're going to say, but Google is firing conservatives for writing stuff that could be available in any high quality journal.
YouTube is demonetizing anything conservative.
That the hard radical left has control over universities, and they're ideologically indoctrinating children in like middle school and grade school. And I think to a degree, that's all true. And also to a degree, the Republicans started this in the 1990s with like Rush Limbaugh and kind of changing the narrative and breaking away to this kind of pundit, our side, your side kind of news. So I get it all, but I don't believe any of it. I think that there is some truth to the Trump derangement syndrome.
Not to believe
and I think
anything.
That there's a lot of truth to like Republicans like not looking at the facts.
Well, you've got two poles dragging at each other, and so at some point those forces, you know, normalize and we kind of meet in the middle. At least that's the hope.
Yeah, I know. On campus, there's no doubt that it leans left. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. To me, but like, so at your conference, and I watched your panel, and we'll put the link in the description.
And this is the media and free speech panel.
Yeah, right? Now you were part of this, and you gave a kind of an address afterwards. But one of the people there that seemed more centrist was like, what do you think a person that's conservative leaning at Berkeley feels like? Talk about an outcast, right? Talk about somebody that might not feel right. I mean, is this not kind of what people on the left would say is the discriminated minority, right? So to me, it's diversity of thought that brings it out, but the left kind of concerned is more diversity of like gender and you know, in race. Well, where am I going wrong, or what would you add to that?
You're not going wrong. I think this is actually a debate that's been happening and has been happening at college campuses for years now. It's been happening since the events at Mizzou. It's been happening since the events at Yale. There is a debate on campus about what diversity means. And you've pointed to exactly that issue. does diversity mean that we are opening up spaces for those who are traditionally left out of spaces, whether that be women or people of color, gay, lesbian, and trans folks, people with different abilities? You know, that is typically what has been meant when they talk about diversity. But now, as you've seen, the language of diversity is being sort of co-opted, and that means that has more of a negative connotation than I necessarily intend it to. But it is being what?
I was thinking the exact same word. I'm glad you said it. I'm like, it's not negative. It's
but it's been taken up by the ideas of sort of conservative groups on college campuses. And I'm one who believes, I'm teaching a class in the fall called Politics, Performance, and Popular Culture, and we're going to be doing a lot of reading from conservative people. And it's really hard, and it's very hard to get young people to, you know, they come to college and they're the top of their class and they know how to absorb material, but we're trying to teach them how to take that material and figure out how to analyze it, and if they're going to form their own opinions about it. So I think there is a space for conservative dialogue, conservative discourse on college campuses, but I think it's, you know, it's got to be in the classroom. It has to be in spaces that aren't just about the media frenzy.
Are you including any trollish behavior in your? I'm very curious about this.
I taught a class called New Media Insights of Performance, and we had like 3 weeks on trolling. I teach a lot about trolling, and that's one of the things that we talked a lot about with the Milo event, is that people, and by people I mean the university, I mean us as a country, hadn't really figured out that that the community had switched tactics, right? They had moved on by technology. They had moved on to trolling tactics, to online tactics, and they were acting them out in real time and space. And that was just something that we weren't prepared for.
Milo is a perfect example.
He's perfect.
Which I wanted to bring up because, you know, I didn't really know who he was up until I think a few months ago. I don't know, because I was going, oh, he's someone that we should be talking to, and so I was like, no, absolutely not.
That is true. That you did say that.
And then I had to look him up, and I do like some of Ben Shapiro's viewpoints, and so when I listened to him talk about Milo, he completely disavowed him. So I got, all right, he is probably an alt-righter. But he did have a really interesting interview on some Australian news channel, and he was talking about how he is like the conservative Stephen Colbert, and so he's trying to do the same type of thing, but he's censored by left-wing media. And I thought it was interesting because he started off as a troll, and I'm pretty sure either he is an anti-Semite or he does it for the troll factor. And so now he's maybe trying to be legitimate, but he's lost all credibility. Yeah. So how do you come back from that?
Here, the conservative Michael Moore. Like, he's not as funny as Colbert, but yeah, Michael Moore would actually be fair. But go on. I didn't want to steal your question.
Yeah, was that a question? I wasn't quite sure.
No, it was commentary, but I ddidn't know how you presented him in your trolling segment in the.
I mean, I think so. There is an article. And her name is escaping me right now. I can't think of it, but a sort of well-known feminist sort of digital scholar who had to face just endless online trolling from a well-known hacker, and he well-known troller, and he doxed her. He sent SWAT to her house. He published her address. He I'm sorry.
Yeah, the swatting, like that's a new thing that I just heard about.
This?
Oh, no, seriously, I had to look.
Call of Duty, bitch.
So, when you swat somebody, you actually you're calling and you claim that there's like some seriously violent crime going on at XYZ address. The SWAT team shows up, and your friend or enemy or whoever it is over there is shitting their pants when the SWAT team breaks in, thinking there's a murder when they're like Washington.
There have been people killed.
Yes, that somebody died.
And recently. This was born in the Call of Duty community.
This is insane. I'm stunned to think that I just learned about this.
And you just learned about this. Yeah. And I just learned about Milo.
You've been swatted before?
No. And I don't play Call of Duty.
I play Battlefield. It's a better community.
Sorry, Lyndsey, we moved away.
No worries. Basically, the point is that all of these sort of trolling tactics, right, that get, in this case, was sent after one woman. And basically what happens is when you do something enough online and enough people start to follow you, then it sort of becomes canon, right? Like suddenly then people think that you have the right to speak because you've put enough out there. And sort of this woman had to remove herself from the online world because of the constant trolling. And this happens primarily to women, to people of color, to people in the online space and in real life. And so what Milo is doing, the tactics that we think about in online space, the things that we think about that are done because they're done sort of for the lulz or under the guise of anonymity, are suddenly coming out and being enacted in real time, in person, and in physical space. And that's how you get the Black Bloc showing up at Sproul Hall or Sproul Plaza, because these tactics are sort of being shifted. And we all knew, to go back to the free speech thing for a second, we all knew it was a publicity stunt. We knew Steve Bannon wasn't showing up. We knew Ann Coulter wasn't showing up, but it wasn't about that. It was about generating publicity. It was about how many times certain individuals could get their name in the Huffington Post or in whatever other media, was going to be covering it. And, when people are 19 and hungry for attention.
Like the trolling and and online that's happening primarily to women and minorities.
You're asking a question.
To me, I think that's going to be. I don't know if that's true. I mean, we
no. The question is, how do you?
It is true.
How do you approve it? Or
but the thing is, I'm sure what's happening is it's trolling against your ideological enemies. Because I mean, we got a ton of this when we were doing our first MythCon, which we tried to make as fair and balanced as possible. Did it tilt a tiny bit to the right? Maybe because a couple of people on the left dropped out at the last minute. But even then, we were right down the center, and we just got Nazi. And we're not a minority. But the thing is, I've never been the subject of trolling to that magnitude. And it's a big deal. I think so. If you're on the right or the left and you don't think the trolls are a big deal, yeah, they're a big deal, especially when they come in mass. So I would say people have got to be a little bit nicer to each other. But I think it was our ideological enemies, those that were saying, no, you can't talk about this. They came after us hard. And I don't think it was because of race or gender.
And it's not just us. If you take like a Jordan Peterson, for example, he constantly talks about the fact that he's also trolled by people who dislike him. And so, after his famous Kathy Newman interview, he goes, all right, well, she got some trolling from people who are supposedly my supporters. He goes, look at all the trolling that happened to me after the fact. So it kind of seems like a two-way street, but
and I think it's
some people
ideology
focus on it
and nothing else. That it doesn't matter if I come out and I say X. I could pick myself as a black man, woman, gay, trans. It doesn't matter. I will get hounded by my ideological enemies.
True.
Yeah, I mean, ideological is a little bit of a sort of a misnomer there, because we're talking about speaking online in a political context, but it doesn't just happen in that case, right? Like a woman could go online and be doing, I don't know, a makeup tutorial or something. And you ever see the comments that are on those things on YouTube videos? Yeah. It's everywhere. It's pervasive. And it is the cloak of anonymity that allows people to feel like they can say whatever they want. And now we are in a moment where the leader of our country says whatever he wants. And I think that has given people a little bit of license. They feel like, all right, well, if Trump's doing it and he's not hiding behind anonymity, then why do I have to hide behind anonymity?
Well, I think that we have to clean up our own, to quote Jordan Peterson, we have to clean up our own homes first before we can say that you need to clean up yours, right? I mean, that's the issue. I think that, and women, yes, I have seen those comments, but to me, I know that slut shaming goes both ways, but women can slut shame other women. And that's.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that it's just coming from men. I'm just saying it's
nasty.
Controlling. It's the nastiness. It is the culture. And I don't know. I mean, we study it from a lot of different ways. We look at sort of the sociology behind it. We look at what sort of like Reddit and 4chan are things that we talk a lot about in our class. And in 4chan, for example, it being a place where you have to go there. You have to go to that really sort of awful, ugly place in order to be part of that community, in order to be considered authentic. And so what does it give the people who participate? What sort of validation are they getting from that they don't get in other parts of their life? And do they really feel that way? Or do they are they indoctrinated to a way of thinking because they're sort of performing a particular role in order to be a part of the community?
Part of a tribe. That's what they get. What do you get? I was going to answer, is it tribalism? Well, what do you think?
Or is it the fact that some people like conflict? So let's say you live, I don't know, in a hick town somewhere, and everyone is your kind of the same political lean as you. You want some controversy. You want to find a leftist to argue against. So you go online and you start shit posting. Yeah. And that's just it's your daily entertainment. I mean, I'm not saying that that's okay behavior, but I can understand someone who's bored off their gourd would go and do that, and that's where you get the trolls from. I don't know if those are troll farms, but that's a logical explanation.
But then what you think about is that boredom, I think, is key, right? Like the idea that people start doing this thing and it becomes pattern. They do it, and then suddenly it's really hard to turn that off. Mm-hmm. And then something you do in other parts of your life.
At that point, like you have friends, you have people that are liking your posts, and now you're that guy that owns them.
But these things have to be, they're temporal. I mean, they can't last forever. We have a ever globalizing population. You have people, you have interracial marriages, and you have mixed religion marriages. You have all sorts of things happening. What's the stat? By 2050, we're all going to be some shade of beige. I mean, there's a lot of stats out there that say that this is just a shrinking problem. So maybe we're just in a weird time warp where things have come to a head. And some people think that they're going to lose their, I don't know, cultural supremacy. And so we just have to get past it. Once we do, we'll live a better life. That's the thought anyway. I wanted to come back to your media and free speech panel, where you were fielding certain questions, and you had some quotes out there that you had thrown. So one of the quotes was, "We became aware of the weight of each decision." What exactly were you referring to when you talked about that?
Yeah. So putting together that conference was a lot of learning experiences. You know, I'm a curator. I focus on performance and new media, and really the idea of bringing people together. I'm not, curating paintings in a museum. I do what's called social practice. And for me, I believe in the value of getting people together in a room to talk about an issue. And it was just sort of proven to me throughout that experience that not everybody sees that, and particularly in an academic setting where certain voices have more value and more cultural capital. And so there were a lot of people who were just so frustrated about the time and the dollars that were being spent dealing with everything else, and the fact that other speakers who were actually told that they couldn't come to the university because of all of the other drama that was coming on, like their events had to be canceled.
This was before or after?
This was during. This was speakers who were coming for, there was a professor who was coming to speak for ethnic studies. There was another professor, I think, who was coming for anthropology. I can't exactly remember.
There was a tweet that, like, this, I think, summers it goes, "I disagree with Robert Wright spending millions in security for alt-right events as some kind of investment in a capacity for dialogue." Mm-hmm. Like, yes, that sums up what you were saying.
Yeah, like, well, that was sort of, he had made the point that he considered this all of this to be sort of positive action, right? Like you invest the dollars, and that means we're spending the dollars, which means we support free speech. And it was just a little concern about where those dollars were being spent.
That's right. If you had to spend $650,000 to fund Ben Shapiro, and then so we didn't have enough to fly 3 people in that were going to, then like maybe they didn't make it.
Well, and the question is,
suck.
how do you promote that conversation? Which is going to be my follow-up to this is, you know, all right, so this happened in September, and then you had the event before in Feb. Has that generated more conversation between the kind of the two sides on campus in your experience?
Well, first of all, it was really hard to get two sides. To be perfectly honest, it was really hard to get people from the right to come, to speak. So
remember that during the event there, somebody asked, he goes, "How many conservatives are in here?" And then like he was like one person, and he goes, "Oh, all 2 of you."
Yeah. I mean, it was hard. So originally the plan was we were only going to, sorry, I have a cat. We were only going to we were only going to invite Berkeley people, right? This was a conference for Berkeley faculty, Berkeley staff, Berkeley students to come together and to make sure that we had people from all sort of 3 areas, to make sure we had undergraduates and graduate students, and that we tried to give equal time to all of those voices. But that's really hard. You can't ignore power dynamics, but we had a really hard time. Like I scoured the university for like the most conservative people I could find, and there weren't many.
Wait, don't they have a club? The Young Conservatives, whatever they have?
And we did. So we didn't have, that was another thing. So part of the issue, we had speakers from Bridge, which was the bipartisan group, and we did not have speakers from the college Republicans or the college Democrats participate, because at that point we had been in so many meetings together. We had been having so many of these events, and they just devolved into screaming matches every single time. And it was like, there's just not enough hours in the day. So
wait,
I offend anybody.
Hold on. So the college Republicans were screaming at the college Democrats?
There were a lot of meetings where, I'm going to get in trouble for this. There were a lot of meetings where there was a lot of heated arguments between sort of the very small group of conservative members of campus and the student organizers on sort of various degrees of the left, because we kept being, there was sort of a coalition of us that kept being invited to the same meetings with the chancellor to kind of sort all of this stuff out. And it became really clear that people weren't ready for dialogue at that point. They were not ready to have a conversation. They were too angry.
So if
that's a really, really good point.
Well, but I'm interested in that if you have typically if you have a minority, which in this case it sounds like the these right wingers were, wouldn't it be the opposition that would be angry at them because they're not conforming? Or I wasn't in the room, so I don't know how that went. But typically when you have these types of altercations, you have the minority sitting back and listening.
Yeah, it was not the case. They were very angry. They were very angry. They felt like they were being attacked for having different views. They at one point were like, "Well, do you guys just want to plan all of our programming for us? Or are you going to just tell us who we can invite from now on?" And
they're becoming like sardonic kind of in their humor.
But that we don't know how the planning process works. So if they're like, "I want to bring, I don't know, a Richard Spencer," well then, is that the line?
They're not going to do that. But here's the Milo
the line.
Here's some needed context. So do you know who Yvette Falarca is?
No.
I don't.
So Yvette Falarca is a middle school teacher in Berkeley, California. And she is like an Antifa member. She's in a group called By Any Means Necessary with an attorney named Chandra Driver. And what she does is brings her middle school class into violent protests and puts them in harm's way. Right. So she's the most radical of the radicals. Right. She's been put up through a number of boards, unions trying to get rid of her, but then she'll bring in the protesters to shut it down. So Yvette Villarca accused, I think, of the guy named was Troy somebody or other, of the college Republicans of sexual harassment. So she filed a restraining order against him. I mean, this is a wholly fictitious thing. So you do have, and again, these are the most radical of the radicals. This isn't I'm not talking about the Berkeley populace. So, but I can see that, oh, well, you're on that side, we're on this side. So I can see how the Republicans are railing around like these guys will do anything to silence us. And now you can't tell like those that supports free speech but find it certain things problematic, like where I think you're coming from, and the Yvette Villarcas that literally follow a by any means necessary kind of strategy in such that will bring middle school students to violent protests. That's insane.
I do want to know how, Lyndsey, since you're part of some of this decision-making process, how do you guys go about it? How do you know where it's fair to draw a line since you are moderating these conversations?
So that was the question that was asked in all of these meetings that got so out of hand, because that was the question that I don't think we can settle on, or we haven't settled on. I think, you had the people on the right, the college Republicans, who felt like, why is I think I remember somebody saying something like, the line is they have to be, of educational merit or academic merit. They have to, have written something. They can't just be like a shock jock. Yeah, right. And that's when somebody responded, well, what about, Ann Coulter's written books? she's a best-selling author. Like, what are these metrics that you're using? So that's really hard. And then somebody was like, I want somebody to come who is, like sincere in their desire to come and speak, who's not just using it as a political. What?
I mean, al-Baghdadi.
I don't know. I don't know what this means. Is the problem. So, yeah. So that's the question. We had
to be sincere,
but I don't think there's any good answers to these. Like,
there's not.
These are the things that we could talk about for 90 years if we were vampires. Like, it never comes to an answer.
I wonder, did anyone bring up the point that if you let these crazies come, and Brian mentioned this earlier, as like the Charlottesville thing, the 200 or however many of these nutcases showed up. If no one had paid attention, they would have burned their shit. Not a single camera was there, not a single protester. That would have fizzled and died, and the entire country would have been better for it. But because a whole bunch of people showed up thinking that this was the next, this was the Fourth Reich, that's what made it more of a reality. So has anyone been bringing that up? Is that let's just ignore these lunatics and let them do whatever they want. As long as they're not hurting anyone, who cares?
I think that, that was one of the topics that was debated during the conference and that was something that a lot of people talked about in advance of these events. And not everybody agreed with that idea. I think there was a large degree of people who had that thought, like, let's just pretend it's not happening. Let's just ignore it and it'll go away. And then there's another degree of people, or another, section of people who think, well, let's look at all of the atrocities that have happened throughout history that we've just said, well, if we ignore it, it'll go away. That don't. So, two sides.
No, I know. It's just, I don't think in this case, it doesn't make sense to me as a valid argument, because even if you take the rise of Hitler, that guy actually was going for a political seat. And so if there was an election, of course you'd have mass protests. We're talking about a rally at a university or in the middle of some
the rise of left-wing authoritarianism has killed millions and hundreds of millions of people as well. To be honest, like fascism or Maoism, what does it matter? It's absolute bloodbath. Like,
well, I think that in all cases, I don't know. Again, at this point in our history, that ignoring things is necessarily gonna work, solely because we all kind of ignored Trump, right? Like, I don't know how many people just really thought, no, it's just a publicity stunt. He's not really serious.
we drove around rural Ohio, well, I expected no one to have like Trump signs out, that everyone would just vote for him, you know, but not advertise it. And everybody was like, no, everyone had him out. And I'm like, man, they're pissed. Like, to me, like that's the Rust Belt was way pissed off. So,
but I think that there was a confluence of a whole bunch of stuff coming together for Trump that people didn't really anticipate. There were a lot of, and I'll put myself in this bucket, really disenfranchised left-wingers who said, fuck no, I will not be told who to vote for, and the DNC can eat it. And so
there was a lot of Bernie voters that turned and went for Trump.
And not even went for Trump. I mean, when I wrote my vote in for Bernie, that was me sticking it to the man.
Yeah, that's true.
And so that doesn't mean that I voted for Trump, but that certainly meant I wasn't going to be led around by the nose.
You opted out.
So yeah, I opted out. So you had a lot of people, maybe like myself, who were just disenfranchised by someone telling me who I needed to vote for. And then you had a bunch of
8 million people less voted from the prior election.
Yes, you had that. Then you had the other thing, which were like the people like me, but on the other side, that kind of wanted an honest candidate and thought that everyone else was formulaic. But this guy was spouting the truth, and so they voted for him. And all of a sudden, now we find out he's a psycho.
Right. I mean, we're finding out more and more about him. But here's one of the things maybe you can answer for me, and that this comes up a lot when it comes like into the free speech issue, and like I don't want to debate my humanity or so on and so forth. That there's some that say that more free speech is better, right? The more speech, the best ideas filter the way to the top, and the others, which seems to come more from the left, that free speech is a zero-sum game. So if we allow more speech for people that are, again, majority people, white males and such, that now infringes against the free speech of minorities and women, I don't really subscribe to that because I don't see it as a zero-sum game. But like, am I reading this wrong, or like, it seems like, what am I missing, or what can you fill me in on?
Yeah, I don't think the idea is that they're wanting less, that anyone's wanting to deny you your free speech. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think the idea is,
right, like if like, why should I comment? Because I'm just one more guy on YouTube. Like,
because you're a white dude, Brian, you're wrong.
But okay, I'm sorry, I should have listened.
I think the issue is making space for voices that haven't been heard. And that doesn't mean that everyone's saying, white men, shut up, we don't want to hear you, you need to go away. It's trying to create an equal playing field where there's just, and in that case, I think it actually is, to your first point, it is more conversation, it is more speech, right? It's just a lot of different speech. And in reality, we hear a lot of the same speech over and over and over again.
Yeah, so in that way, I'm with you, because like, I do want to hear different voices, people I disagree with, minority voices, and especially diversity viewpoint that I definitely don't agree with. But that kind of falls under my whole idea that more speech is better.
But people don't like to listen to the same thing, and I think that's always missed. Like, I don't know who. I mean, I can't stand listening to the same exact message over and over again. I want to hear.
I looked at your music collection, man.
It's all over the board, country and
nothing but Nickelback.
So I love Nickelback too. Yeah.
Oh God.
I see. Don't judge.
End interview now.
Like, we have different opinions, but we're both, white dudes. So that doesn't, I don't remember who said it, but there's more diversity within a group than between groups.
That's true.
Within our group, we have a shit ton of diversity, even, everyone within the MM community. So it's not like you bring up, a black trans chick up here, and all of a sudden she's going to have entirely different viewpoints because of the group that she associates with.
Like, Lyndsey, what do you think about like Jordan Peterson and those that are coming out, like saying the collectivization? Like, gays think this, minorities, women think this, black women think this, black lesbian women are, 3 times removed, and like but there's enormous diversity in black lesbian women, like of diversity of thought. Like, how can, like, does intersectionality not just collectivize people into smaller groups? Like,
yeah. So I understand what you're asking here, and it is, I think this has been my favorite word tonight. It's tricky. So they, Spivak or Spivak, cannot think of how you pronounce her name right now, calls it strategic essentialism. So it's the idea that in certain cases you essentialize a group. And she was talking about second wave feminism, and which really was saying the whole idea with second wave feminism was all women experience fill in the blank, right? It was by essentializing all women into one group, then suddenly there's power, there's leverage behind it. It's enough people that somebody will start to listen, right? And so after that, whether it's third wave or we've done away with waves and it's just now intersectionality in life, we're realizing we're thinking more about situated knowledges, right? We're thinking about what does it mean for me as somebody who is a straight white woman who grew up in the Midwest, who has that background, who shoots guns and goes fishing and, you know, has a super Republican family, to live in, you know, a conservative bubble? Or what is it like to be a white or a black woman, a gay black woman who is grown up in a liberal bubble, who is then transplanted to, you know, somewhere red? So I think the idea with intersectionality is it's not about trying to create these mini groups. And I see where it happens because, again, it's trying to leverage the power of a singular voice, but it's about trying to get everybody to acknowledge that we come from different life experiences. We have different backgrounds, and those backgrounds are of value, and they haven't always been seen as of value. So how do we take a second, and when it comes to whether it's, you know, passing laws that affect different people in different ways, or, you know, considering the cost of medicine, or, you know, whatever the issue is of this current week, that it's going to affect different people differently, and we need to make space for all of those voices.
I see what you're trying to say, and I generally agree with it, but it seems like in practice it's probably difficult, because I feel that, you know, we had trans people come up to us at our last conference saying, well, I don't feel comfortable in LGBT spaces because I don't think like them politically. So I feel a lot more comfortable at with our conference, which was controversial, not really, but supposedly, because I won't be criticized for my thoughts here. You know, like we had a too, but I thought, well, okay, even if it's only 10% of trans people think like X, right? 90%'s over here. Well, now you're just discriminating against a smaller minority. And then to shame those people, to me, like, kind of is the thread that undoes intersectionality. If you're going to do that, if you're going to collectivize in that way. And I think, I'm not saying intersectionality the theory makes that mistake, but I think people in practice do.
Of course, but you have the same problem with communism. Sure, it sounds great, but then, you know, when you go to practice it, it unravels, because you have individuals with individual wants and needs. And that's one of the issues we have with intersectionality, that it starts lumping people together. And I get it, it's for policy purposes, but then you lose the individual thread that everyone has in there. So then people get pissed off.
It seems to then function like a fundamentalist religion. You know,
well, I think you also have to remember the context within which the idea of intersectionality became common parlance, right? Like, we are in a moment where people are thinking and talking about intersectionality, but they're doing it on social media. They're doing it in bubbles. They're doing it where everybody's quick to react. They're doing it in a space where, you're shamed for saying the wrong thing. And I think that's actually a huge, it's an issue. And it's something that makes me sad, because I think that we have this really interesting, engaging group of young people who are coming up, and they want to be active in the world. And I hate for people who just don't know enough yet, or haven't known what other people know, to necessarily be shamed before they can really learn and grow. So I don't have an answer for that, other than we all just have to have, thick skin and
make a really good point, because like, say we're talking and then you bring up something, and now I'm not sure what my footing is. And then I kind of react and I think, well, I think this, I may be putting something out there, and you could say, well, Brian, you're wrong because of this, this, and this. And then I might be, I need to think about that. That's someplace where I could grow and possibly change my mind. But if this happened on the internet and I'm testing myself on, well, okay, I think this, and then I get bombed by 20 million people, then I could just reinforce. Then somebody says, yeah, all those lefties are all the same. And then I've now strengthened myself in maybe a weaker position. So,
and I think that's where you're losing the people, perhaps like me, who are left, who are both fiscally liberal and socially liberal, but who maybe who don't feel like they are liberal enough for certain, whether it be radical feminism or whatever it is, that worry that they're going to be shamed. So
we liked your tribalism. What was the tweet that you saw from Lyndsey? It was
you retweeted one. It was funny because we were trying to figure out what your politics were, like, we were taking bets and guesses. So one of them you retweeted and I just lost it.
Anyway, it had to do with something.
I'll be able to pull it. You retweeted. It goes, somebody said I was being too feminist in class. And it goes, and there was a dial between debating my own humanity and hardcore feminist, and was turned up all the way. And I thought,
no, it was turning it down to hardcore feminist.
Was it down? Yeah. Okay. Well, either way, it was art.
Yeah, that was an actual woman's art project her professor had told her to make her art a little less feminist. And so she ramped up the dial.
Yeah, she turned it up. Right.
Oh, that's funny.
I mean, I can appreciate that as long as you can have the conversation, even if you were going to defend the collectivism, even if you were going to say Ben Shapiro shouldn't have been allowed on campus, but you're going to be as polite as you are, like that's a conversation that we can learn something from. Like that these are the kind of conversations that I think need to happen more often. You mentioned that it is really hard. I told another quote out that our bubbles are getting so much smaller that it's even more difficult to find somebody to talk to, and then even and very hard to make that productive.
So Lyndsey, this is exactly why we wanted to take the time to talk to you, and we absolutely had a lovely time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Love diverse viewpoints, and we have 5 million other things to talk to you about, but we'll save it for another day. If you get a chance to come to Milwaukee in September for MythCon,
we're going to try to repeat what you were doing to be as fair and balanced. Yep. I remember the thing when you said we were very, like, every tweet, every action that you took had enormous gravity. We feel the same way, but we're trying to be down the middle and curate, if I can borrow your term, a conversation to the best of our ability between differing perspectives.
Well, I hope it's successful.
No, it'll be in September and it'll be exciting. So
if you want to make a trip back to your home state, we'd love to have you, because
let me know. Keep me posted.
And you can we can go out to the shooting range.
Yeah, there you go.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Hey, Lyndsey.